E3 was a very important convention for me in the 2010s, with games and consoles getting introduced at the event every year. Known as the Electronic Entertainment Expo, thousands of people would show up for E3. Demos would be on the show floor along with games from the previous year. Several companies hosted presentations for their new consoles and gameplay of upcoming games. This video will cover the conventions one at a time, along with a little more detail on console announcements and where E3 went. The inaugural event for the Electronic Entertainment Expo was held at the Los Angeles Convention Center for many of those in the industry to learn of new products ahead of the home market. This E3 was recorded by the audience, with early video sharing websites hosting the videos several years after the fact. The Entertainment Software Association created the event to combat the Consumer Electronics Show, which was hosted at a different venue. The 3DO had its own stand for people to try out the fledgling console, announcing the 3DO M2 as well. Nintendo was the major company to the public, with them holding one of the first showcases for the event. The Virtual Boy was introduced, along with several games in the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and Nintendo 64 catalog. The closest competitors to Nintendo at the time were Sega, who announced the new console they've been working on in their own showcase. The Sega Saturn had very poor marketing, with it releasing the same day as the announcement. At $399, the Saturn was unfortunately set to fail. Sony also had a showcase to reveal their new console, the first PlayStation. Sony also announced a release date for it and pricing that they changed to combat the Saturn. SNK showed off one of the 30 King of Fighter games to crowds, also announcing the Neo Geo CD console. Even though there was not much to come from them, Atari also showed off new games for their console, the Atari Jaguar. Atari also showed a new Jaguar VR peripheral. Surprisingly, Microsoft also appeared at the event without any product to showcase outside of Windows and Flight Simulator. Nintendo had another showcase revealing dozens of N64 games. They also came out with the introduction of the Game Boy Pocket. Doom and GoldenEye became the fixtures for the showcase, with Nintendo's dominance becoming stronger by having the games on their system. The Nintendo 64 then had a pricing change, going to $250. Sony also had a showcase yet again, announcing the price drop of the PlayStation to $199. Due to Sony's sudden price change last year, Sega ran flyers throughout the show floor to announce their price change to $199. A developer, Scavenger, also had a showcase, but not much came from it. Nintendo, Sony, and Sega continued their showcase streaks in 1997, with Nintendo showing Conker's Bad Fur Day and Banjo-Kazooie to start off. Nintendo referenced the N64 disk drive a few times as well. Sega appeared at the event, showing a couple games, but nothing too important came from them this year. Sony showed off their new analog controller for the PlayStation. The event moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Returning to Atlanta, the regulars continued their streaks. Sega finally revealed something that would save their place in the console market, announcing the Sega Dreamcast. Nintendo continued their trend at the top, continuing to hint at the N64 disk drive. The most recognized scene from their showcase was the reveal of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Sega had a rather calm event showcase, increasing the interest for their console at a minimum. The streak continues as the main three returned for showcases in Los Angeles. Sony finally caught up to their competitors, hinting at a second console, which would release sometime in the next year. Nintendo continued their evolving consoles, hinting at a new console known as Project Dolphin. Sega poured out several games for the Dreamcast, with their conference being very impressive. We finally have a new competitor in the console market, with Microsoft joining the arena. The Microsoft Xbox was put on stage, showing gameplay of futuristic first-person shooter Halo. Nintendo had a calm year, showing the Game Boy Advance. Sega, on the other hand, shot themselves in the foot. Even though they had so many games to show, Sony stole the show very easily. The PlayStation 2 was talked about to great extent, with over 50 games being released with it in holiday 2000. Metal Gear Solid 2 was shown in great detail, gaining tons of interest for the PS2. Nintendo finally announced releases for the Game Boy Advance and Project Dolphin, now known as the Nintendo GameCube. Microsoft had a rough time releasing the Xbox, with the console coming to the States first. Sega withdrew from the console market, becoming a developer-publisher only. With this change, almost everyone asked for Sega's library of games. Sony revealed more games for the PlayStation 2, with their bubbling rise to the top of the market becoming imminent. With Sega off of showcases, French-based company Ubisoft took its place. They were not making a console, but they were making great games. Microsoft continued to show Halo, saying subtle jabs that there might be a sequel. Nintendo, on the other hand, showed Metroid Prime, a first-person take of Metroid. Sony gloated that they won the console war, with the sales of the PlayStation 2 blowing everything else out of the water. Ubisoft had another calm conference, delivering games for all of the consoles available. Sony somehow knew that Nintendo was going to announce a new handheld, and announced the PlayStation Portable. Nintendo, on the other hand, announced the Game Boy Advance SP. Microsoft showed more games from developer Rare, with crowds liking the gameplay mechanics of Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Even though Sony announced the PlayStation Portable, they haven't released it yet. After seeing how the competition worked on the handhelds, Nintendo returned to the event to show off the Nintendo DS, or Dual Screen. Nintendo also showed a new Zelda game with a more adult tone. Outside of Halo 2 being shown off during the Microsoft showcase, the Xbox continued to be behind the pack. Ubisoft tried to pull in big games, with Far Cry and Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon 2 being shown. Microsoft took up the stage to reveal more of their new console, the Xbox 360. Unfortunately, the PlayStation 3 was announced by Sony on the same day. Nintendo waited until the next day to announce the Revolution, better known as the Wii. That Zelda game from the year before became Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, with the gameplay on the GameCube looking great. Outside of King Kong, Ubisoft didn't have much to show. The new landmark consoles took over the market, with the Nintendo Wii taking the majority of sales. Nintendo's great success was from the pricing at $250. In comparison to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, affordability became the name of the game. Microsoft showed off upcoming titles like BioShock and Mass Effect for the first time. They also boasted about Xbox Live and its arcade. Sony mentioned Killzone, Resistance, and Uncharted for their showcase. Ubisoft showed the interesting game that they've been working on called Prince of Persia: Assassins. Ubisoft also had gameplay of Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Vegas. The Renaissance year of gaming. E3 2007 saw many important unveilings. Nintendo introduced the Wii Balance Board, a new way to play games on the system and encourage fitness. Super Mario Galaxy got a release date, along with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. The newest version of Mario Kart, Mario Kart Wii, was also shown. Sony showed off Gran Turismo 5 and Infamous, along with the next Metal Gear. Microsoft announced Halo 3 and showed gameplay for BioShock. Call of Duty Modern Warfare showcased their new engine, while Fallout 3 also had gameplay. Ubisoft had a big portion of their showcase discussing No More Heroes and updating their Prince of Persia title to Assassin's Creed. Microsoft started the expo with a bang, announcing an agreement with Square Enix to release Final Fantasy XIII on the Xbox 360, as well as the PS3. Breaking assumptions of a Sony-Square deal for the franchise, many Xbox executives were excited. Nintendo threw tons of peripherals for the Wii in people's faces, as well as highlighting city folk just in time for the holidays. Sony barely had a show outside of Little Big Planet. Ubisoft didn't have much of a showcase outside of Shaun White for the Wii. Microsoft had a ton of reveals, including the introduction of Project Natal, Metal Gear Rising, Halo Reach, Forza Motorsport 3, Modern Warfare 2, and Final Fantasy XIII. Nintendo showed a few games in comparison: Mario Galaxy 2, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Sony announced the PlayStation Move and Eye, which could track the player's movement similar to Project Natal and the Wii Remote. Sony also showed Uncharted 2 and God of War 3, along with The Last Guardian and Gran Turismo. Ubisoft showcased Splinter Cell Conviction and Assassin's Creed 2. Microsoft reintroduced Project Natal as the Kinect, with several games designed for the device which would plug into the Xbox 360. Games like Just Dance 2 stole the show. Nintendo showed off Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, along with announcing the new Nintendo 3DS. Sony covered a lot, with Killzone 3, Infamous 2, and Portal 2 stealing the show. Joel McHale from the show Community hosted Ubisoft's presentation, with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Driver San Francisco, and Ghost Recon Future Soldier being highlighted. Konami joined the presentations this year, not showing much in their first foray besides a new Saw game. EA also had their first presentation, showcasing Battlefield Bad Company 2. YouTube creators started to gain access to E3 around this time, with coverage of the event becoming more widespread. Channels like Machinima would find ways to get creators passes as reporters, among other things. Nintendo's presentation showcased the new Wii U console, along with several 3DS games. Sony announced the new PlayStation Vita handheld, along with Uncharted 3 and BioShock Infinite. Microsoft highlighted Modern Warfare 3, Gears of War 3, and Halo 4, along with some more Kinect games which no one wanted to invest into. Ubisoft mostly just showed Rayman Origins, along with the incredibly appealing Far Cry 3. Konami had a pre-show where Metal Gear Solid 3 was put on the 3DS. Mega 64 was also a part of the show, revealing the Metal Gear Solid HD collection. EA spent most of the presentation showing Battlefield 3, along with Madden NFL 12. More YouTube creators covered the event, with Uberhaxer Nova having multiple videos with his reactions to announcements. Microsoft showed Call of Duty Black Ops 2, South Park: The Stick of Truth, and the first Forza Horizon game. Sony had an amazing presentation on The Last of Us, along with Beyond Two Souls. Nintendo started to release exclusive titles for the Wii U, with New Super Mario Bros. U and Pikmin 3 being big announcements. Ubisoft also had a very solid presentation, showcasing Assassin's Creed 3 and Watch Dogs. Konami had another pre-show, with Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance being the only major announcement. EA showed many games from last year, along with Medal of Honor Warfighter. Sony and Microsoft finally caught up to the Wii U, announcing the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Halo 5, Quantum Break, Infamous Second Son, and The Order 1886 were all introduced during their separate presentations. Nintendo showed The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker HD for the Wii U, along with Bayonetta 2 and Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U. Nintendo had its first direct broadcast, which they would continue during every year instead of a proper conference. Ubisoft revealed Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, The Crew, and The Division. Konami's final presentation was interesting, with a reveal of Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. EA played trailers for Battlefield 4 and their new project, Titanfall. With Konami ending their pre-shows, the remaining companies continued their presentations. Nintendo's main announcement was of a new Zelda game during the second annual Direct, along with Mario Maker. Sony showed Destiny, Bloodborne, No Man's Sky, Batman Arkham Knight, and Grand Theft Auto 5. Microsoft, on the other hand, showed Forza Horizon 2, Sunset Overdrive, Crackdown 3, Halo, Master Chief Collection, and Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Ubisoft had a smaller showcase with Assassin's Creed Unity, Rainbow Six Siege. EA showed a new Star Wars Battlefront game, along with Battlefield Hardline and a new Dragon Age game, Inquisition. The interesting idea of virtual reality games became more popular, leading to Oculus having their own presentation to showcase some of their games. Bethesda had their first event presentation, revealing trailers for Fallout 4 and a new Doom. Bethesda also showed Dishonored 2 for a brief time. Microsoft highlighted Sea of Thieves, Dark Souls 3, and Cuphead. Sony also continued their presentation streak, showing Hitman, Shenmue 3, Horizon Zero Dawn, Final Fantasy VII's remake, Call of Duty Black Ops 3. Ubisoft had a small show with For Honor and Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands stealing the show. EA had a small show too, with Mass Effect 4 becoming Mass Effect Andromeda. Nintendo showcased minor games during their direct broadcast, including a new Star Fox and Amiibos. Amiibos were interactable figures that worked with the Wii U, along with future consoles. Square Enix joined the presentation front with Nier Automata, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and Kingdom Hearts 3 gaining some major interest. For the first time in presentation form, the PC gaming show was shown to a live audience. Square Enix took up the pre-show duties from Konami, showing more gameplay for Deus Ex Mankind Divided. EA had a big presentation showing Titanfall 2 and Battlefield 1, the latter being a World War I game. Bethesda's newest reveal was Prey, a new take on a classic Xbox 360 game. Ubisoft showed Watch Dogs 2, along with revealing the upcoming Assassin's Creed film. Nintendo's digital conference was highlighted by the upcoming Zelda game known as Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was intended for the Wii U still. Microsoft presented Gears of War 4 and Forza Horizon 3. Sony revealed the PlayStation VR, also showcasing a new God of War and an impressive-looking Spider-Man game. The PC gaming show was presented for the second year in a row. Nintendo didn't introduce the Nintendo Switch formally last E3, but they did introduce games for it this year. Super Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and teases for Metroid Prime 4 were all throughout the digital presentation. Horizon Zero Dawn sequel, Destiny 2, and Call of Duty World War II. Microsoft revealed Forza Motorsport 7. Ubisoft showed Far Cry 5 and introduced Beyond Good and Evil 2. Bethesda's conference had The Enemy Within 2 and Wolfenstein 2 all over it. EA introduced A Way Out, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Devolver Digital, had a showcase. The company never held a presentation in the convention center, but definitely made the most of it. Intel's one-time presentation was for their processors, along with gameplay of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. EA had a decent conference showing Battlefield 5 for the first time. EA also showed Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Unraveled 2. Microsoft went crazy for their presentation, announcing and showing about 50 games. Sony, on the other hand, focused on The Last of Us Part 2, Ghosts of Tsushima, and Death Stranding. Nintendo, in another virtual conference, featured several games for the Switch, some of them releasing on other consoles beforehand. Bethesda had a big conference with Doom Eternal and Rage 2 being the main highlights. Square Enix also had a major conference with Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy XIV, Octopath Traveler, and Dragon Quest XI being the most prominent. Ubisoft reintroduced Beyond Good and Evil 2 while also announcing The Division 2. Devolver Digital returned to make fun of conventional presentations, creating an extreme version of the publisher-gamer interaction. Sega returned to presentations for this year, aligning with Atlus to announce new games. Sega and Atlus announced Catherine Full Body, Shenmue 1 and 2, and Team Sonic Racing. Microsoft had another major conference full of games, with Psychonauts 2, Borderlands 3, Elden Ring, and Cyberpunk 2077 carrying most of the interest. Strangely, Sony stopped their streak of appearances this year. Bethesda announced Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop. Nintendo had another virtual presentation, with several dozens of games being available for the Switch. Square Enix showed more of the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Life is Strange 2. Ubisoft had a paper-thin presentation with Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint and Watch Dogs Legion being the only new games people were interested in. Devolver made fun of Nintendo's virtual conferences by having their own. The company also established itself as a publisher-developer studio. There were 11 major presentations that were set to happen in 2020, but due to a funny sickness during this year's E3 was canceled. If there was a conference, Microsoft was in line to introduce their new generation Xbox Series consoles. Sony, even though they weren't confirmed for E3, would have been in the same line to introduce the PlayStation 5. Along with new exclusives and backwards compatibility options, these consoles were affected by the virus that took over the world. Some of the games from Microsoft that would have been introduced include Scorn, Yakuza Like a Dragon, a new Forza Motorsport, Stalker 2, and Halo Infinite. Nintendo planned a small video package celebrating 30 years of Mario. EA would have shown off their new game It Takes Two, as well as introducing a new skate game. Ubisoft was planned to introduce Far Cry 6, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Hyperscape. Devolver was also booked to introduce more games they'd be publishing. Outside of that, Capcom, Bandai Namco, Sega, Square Enix, Take-Two for the first time, and Warner Brothers Interactive for the first time would have presented new games and features. The Electronic Entertainment Expo was digital in 2021. This meant no crowds, no in-person presentations, just major companies and limited space studios. Capcom, Bandai Namco, Sega, Square Enix, Take-Two, Warner Brothers Interactive, Gearbox, Xseed, Coach, Turtle Beach, and Verizon had smaller presentations. Gearbox had promotionals for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, alongside the upcoming Borderlands movie. Square Enix introduced remasters for Final Fantasy 1 through 6, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and Life is Strange Remastered. Capcom promoted Resident Evil 8 and Street Fighter V over and over. Ubisoft, outside of a new Avatar game, barely had anything to bring up. Microsoft and Bethesda, they merged their presentations for the year. Back 4 Blood, Battlefield 2042, Hades, Slime Rancher 2, Far Cry 6, Forza Horizon 5, and Starfield stole their show. Nintendo announced another 30 or so games to be brought over to the Switch. Bandai Namco highlighted Elden Ring, along with the Dark Pictures anthology. Verizon also had a show where they compared their connectivity to other providers, but it's strange strange for them to do so because they're not a gaming company. Turtle Beach did the same thing. They're not making games, but you can play them with their products. Turtle Beach didn't need a presentation, but did one anyways. Take-Two did a better job at this, showing gameplay for a new Ratchet & Clank game, also showing Phantasy Star Online 2. Warner Brothers Interactive's first stage appearance was just for Back 4 Blood as well. For their first time on stage, Siege showed multiple games they were working on, with nothing of note sticking out in my opinion. Coach had a primetime show with barely any gameplay, almost killing the brand. And finally, we look over to Sega, one of the first companies for the event. To celebrate Sonic's 30th anniversary, they also announced Sonic Colors Ultimate. That funny virus from 2020 was still affecting people being near each other in a closed environment. And with Sony pulling out multiple years, others began to follow suit. The company that runs E3, the ESA, still wanted to return in some form for 2023. Summer Games Fest, a digital live stream ran by the Game Awards host Jeff Keighley, started to become easier to produce. Before anything could be put together for 2023, Nintendo and Microsoft joined Sony in quitting the convention. Soon after, Ubisoft, Tencent, and Sega all left as well. This led to the event being swiftly canceled in March of 2023. The president of the ESA still wanted to put something together as E3 for 2024, but scrapped the idea for a comeback in September of the same year. After bailing on 2024, the ESA is planning to have a comeback in 2025, but under a new format and structure. The name of the convention, E3, was also thrown in the bin, but the company is still planning to return in some shape or form. The future of the event is filled with uncertainty, but audiences should expect great changes that will improve the experience of it all. E3 was a pillar in the gaming market for decades, and to see a decay in real time was very disappointing. Next year, we'll see something similar, but under a new name, and that it will capture the audience the exact same way.